Hi, welcome to Get Used to It. I'm Sheila Kuehl, your hostess. And as we do occasionally in this series of shows, we're having as our guest one person today for the whole hour. We call these series Voices of Our Lives. And today we're very, very fortunate to have Nan Washburn with us, who many of you may have heard on NPR recently talking about the lives of, plight of, fate of women orchestra conductors in America at this time, and more specifically perhaps women who are lesbians who are conductors, of which there must be a really small group. Nan is the music director and conductor of the Plymouth Symphony in Michigan, and also the artistic director and conductor of the West Hollywood, California Orchestra. Welcome, Nan.
Thank you very much.
Well, I was intrigued hearing your story and what you've had to say over the years about your work, and I thought perhaps other people would be intrigued as well. But to start kind of early, tell us a little bit about your growing up. Where did you grow up? And the story will eventually take us to, why music?
Right. You actually asked very hard questions. Most people want to know what I did last week, and it's just like you're asking me, what did I do when I was 8 and 9? I come from a fairly large family, 5 siblings. I grew up in Ventura, California, and my parents still live there and are season subscribers to the West Hollywood Orchestra.
It's a bit of a schlep, but they come in to watch you
they love it. They love it.
Tales.
That's right. That's right. And all of us were given music lessons and encouraged to play. My parents aren't musicians, though they love it, and but they just insisted everybody take a year of piano, and then they could choose another instrument if they wanted to. And I took piano. It was okay. It was kind of fun, but I really wanted to play the flute. So age 9, I started playing flute, and it was my older sister is a CPA and also sings choruses a lot, but she was always considered the smart one, and I had to do something different. So aside from climbing trees and riding unicycles and things, I really was focused on music fairly early on, because they told me I was kind of good at it, and little ego got a little bit raised there. But it was my mother actually that really kind of nudged me the next notch to audition for the local youth orchestra in Ventura. And I did that when I was 13, I think.
So the youth orchestra in Ventura is like a city-sponsored orchestra?
It was,
or
at the time,
or?
It was the county-wide youth orchestra connected to the Ventura County Symphony. That orchestra has now merged with the New West Symphony, or has become the New West Symphony, so it doesn't carry the same name. But at the time, long ago, it was the youth orchestra in Ventura County. And so I think I mentioned this yesterday, that I auditioned and I made next to the last chair out of, I don't know, 7 flute players or something. But I had my eye on the first flute, and I became
You mean
first
the
flute.
chair, not the person?
That's right. I wanted the chair, I wanted the solos, and I worked very hard. I also was able to meet a very important person in my life, my first real flute teacher, Burnett Atkinson, who really nudged me along. And so I got to be first flute then, and then within 2 years after that, he had brought me into the Ventura County Symphony as the piccolo player.
So you were 15 or 16?
16, yeah.
In the county symphony?
Right.
You must have been one of the youngest, or
I
if
was.
not the.
I was. They had a couple of others in the string section, but yeah, it was exciting. I mean, having your teacher playing all those wonderful solos. Of course, I had to be right on top of things, or I really heard about it. It wasn't like I could come in and oh, this is kind of fun. It had to be top notch, and I still have fear of forgetting a pencil. If I don't have a pencil with me at a rehearsal, I'm just cooked goose.
You mean it's instilled in you by your teacher?
Absolutely, yes.
Right. So I think I saw you at a rehearsal one time.
And I didn't have a pencil, right?
No, talking to the players about whether they had brought pencils with them.
It's very important.
How important that was.
Because you have to write, little things down.
You are a stickler for details, I know.
Yes.
Which is probably why you became a conductor, but it's too quick to get to that transition.
That's right, you want more. Yes.
Well, in a way, I think it's very interesting, because I can understand, what a person who plays the flute, a flutist, does. I've seen that. Mm-hmm. I have absolutely no comprehension, except to see somebody from the back doing this, what a conductor does or how they do it. And so I'm interested in how you might have gone, why you might have transitioned from a player to a conductor.
It was a very slow transition because I didn't even make the first step into a beginning conducting class until I turned 30,
wow.
which is way past the age when, I mean, I was told then if you weren't a successful conductor by age 26, you might as well forget it. And of course, I had to forget it because, I mean, I couldn't.
You would never be 26 again.
That's right. That's right. So basically, I have sort of a three-part way of my venture into that area of conducting, because I was really set on being an orchestral flutist, and what I realized is I loved orchestral music. I like playing solos, like with just piano or something, but I love the orchestra. And so all my degrees, UC Santa Barbara, bachelor's there, and then I also studied the Music Academy of the West in Santa Barbara, and then did a master's at New England Conservatory in Boston, all in flute performance, very specific. And actually, at the time that I was studying flute, when student conductors would get up and do things, we all snickered because we thought they couldn't play their instruments. That's why they became a conductor. So I wasn't working always with people that were very knowledgeable and very skilled with as conductors. I mean, a lot of, I think there's been a whole generation of, or many generations I should say, where if you were a good musician and you studied and learned a score, you could be a conductor if you just had the nerve to get up there and do it. What's happened in this century is that there has been created this technique, this actual thing, that skill you need to acquire in order to actually really do it.
Hmm. Well, as a orchestral performer, you said you went to the New England
Conservatory.
It must have been very competitive. I mean,
very competitive.
So at that point in your life, I mean, you know, despite the fact that you said your sister might have been characterized as the smart one, my experience of you is that you're the smart one, or at least one of the smart ones. And to make the decision, this isn't just something you were doing while you were in high school and you were also good at math and, you know, other subject matters. You had to decide music was going to be what you did. That must have been difficult in its own way. I mean, I don't know whether you can see in advance how difficult it's going to be, but most families say, oh, don't be a musician, you'll never make a dime.
Well, I think some of that is also, that's what parents definitely say now. And I had trouble actually teaching at a certain point because there are so few jobs and it is so competitive. However, if it was just strictly competitive, just for whoever's the best, that would be one thing. But what I found out, and I was rather naive because I'd been really under the care of my flute teacher who had brought me into these orchestras and just nurtured me along. And then I went off to New England Conservatory and I found out that things were a little different. You know, all of a sudden it was how I looked, made a big difference. And I really found out that being from California was not a good thing.
Yeah, New England, California. California's bad in New England, I know.
Yeah, so that was a curious thing.
Huh.
In fact, I even knew a flute player who had been the piccolo player for a year with the San Francisco Symphony that was also kind of not encouraged at New England.
Well, but the flute as an instrument is a more acceptable instrument for women. At least I've seen a number of, you know, young girls and then women who play the flute. Conducting is not as acceptable a place for women, at least from what I've seen. And I only assume, since this is the way I look at things, there must be some glass ceiling, there must be some kind of barrier. I don't know if it's about flutists don't become conductors or women don't become conductors. So how did you, what was your transition and how did that work?
Well, again, it took a long time. I had worked with a couple of very, very fine conductors and I knew what should be happening up there. I'd worked with a whole bunch of horrible conductors and I knew, because I had been grouping my flute students together, because all of the time that I was playing I was also teaching, to be in flute choirs. So I actually was, you know, moving my arms and getting everybody to play together. So I had a little hit of that and I kind of liked it and I knew that I needed to kind of look at that. But it's something that is, it's just so ethereal, you know, the conducting thing. I don't know, it's still a mystery to me, I don't know. But the women issue is certainly an issue. And we spoke about this earlier too, that I had seen some women conductors, there were very few when I started, and most everybody was a lot larger person. And so I also came away with the idea that if you weren't a guy, you had to kind of have some presence that people recognized or paid attention to. So it wasn't really until several years later, after I actually met Joanne Folletta, bringing her in, recruiting her to be with the Women's Philharmonic, which I was a co-founder of, that I realized that you didn't have to be tall, you just needed a very large podium. And so now I have it written into my contracts that they have to have a certain height, otherwise the players are all kind of like trying to see, and it makes a huge difference.
Yes, I understand. When I was chairing the California Assembly, I had to also stand on a step, because otherwise, you know, you're going,
right.
All right, that's it. You're breaking the rules. You know, nobody can see you. So I totally understand. But still, you had to make the decision, and I'm really interested in that.
Okay.
Because here you are at the New England Conservatory, thinking you're going to be a flutist or, you know, a
Right.
orchestral performer. Something changed.
Yes. I realized, first of all, it was very political in terms of who got where. I started looking and thinking about music in a much larger way. Flute is I love the flute. I miss playing a lot, but it's just one line, especially if you're talking about orchestral music, you're just one line. And I'd think, oh, that second bassoon, oh, that's great, wow. And I started definitely paying much more attention to lots, you know, the bigger picture. But it really was with my work with the Women's Philharmonic. This was after graduate school, where two of the other co-founders of the Women's Philharmonic in San Francisco approached me with the idea of, let's start this orchestra. And I had just come from Boston, and there had been a very wonderful but failed attempt called the New England Women's Symphony, all women, just playing women composers, and it was very different from, there's actually a whole history of women's orchestras, but they were, many of them arose out of World War II when a lot of the men were off fighting, and they were more women's social clubs than they were, you know, coming out of 1980, you know, we're here to make a point. Especially when it came to women composers. And along the road, I had done some women's studies classes when they first appeared at UC Santa Barbara, and gotten very intrigued with the history of women in music in the US. And going through some articles and looking at some things, I actually found out for the first time, light bulb, that there were and had been many women composers. I mean, hundreds and hundreds and thousands, and we'd never ever heard of them in music school. So I actually came to conducting, and my real excitement about doing programming and shaping the whole thing. See, conductor is just what you do on stage and putting the performance together. A music director and an artistic director, I have these two titles, it's the same, get to shape the whole season, you know, choose the guest artists, pick every piece, and really put something together that I think of as a real, a whole artistic thing in itself. And we were talking earlier that I like to think of each program as a good meal, that, you know, from top to finish, that's very, very carefully planned.
So did the Women's Symphony in San Francisco, did they play only women composers?
We actually did, we featured women composers, but then we also did standard repertoire. That had been, I think, my idea with the thought that it could also build the orchestra, and there's something less scary if somebody can come and hear a Beethoven symphony or something, that then you give them the other, you know.
Less scary than taking a risk on somebody they'd never heard of.
Yeah, I really believe in sandwiching or any kind of packaging to lure people in to hear something that they're afraid to listen to.
By afraid, you mean, I never heard of that person, I don't know if I'm going to be wasting my time,
Yeah.
I don't know what it's like or if I'll like it.
Right, and that is exactly what a lot of people say when you say, come to an orchestra concert. Well, I don't know anything about it, I don't know if I'd like it. I think you have to know a bunch of stuff. And I, no, don't have to know a bunch of stuff. Do you like music? If you like music, come down, you know, come to the show, and you'll have a good time.
So how did you then come to be hired by the Plymouth Symphony in Michigan and the West Hollywood Orchestra? I mean, I bet you a lot of people in West Hollywood don't know there's a West Hollywood Orchestra, or if they do, may not have ever come to hear it, not to mention the rest of us around in Los Angeles. And Plymouth also, I mean, we know nothing in California about Michigan, but I'm sure you in Michigan know plenty about Plymouth. How does one then, do you audition? Do you hear about openings? I mean, how did you come to be the musical director of both of these orchestras?
Well, both of them had job descriptions posted in national, I think for national publications, specific trade ones, the American Symphony Orchestra League, Conductors Guild, things like that, where those openings are posted. I think the West Hollywood Orchestra had it posted with the Association of California Symphonies, which has a job listing, I think, every month that comes out. And so that's where you hear about those. It's almost a job in itself just to put an application out there. There were 167 applicants for Plymouth. I think there were only 30 for West Hollywood, but I've been in searches where I was a finalist where there were 300 plus applicants, and you get down to be a finalist of 5, and you've already done so much, but just trying to get that one top job.
Well, I'm also, of course, interested in my guests because they are all gay or lesbian or bisexual or transgender. I mean, that's part of why I want to do the show, is to let people see the great variety in our community. But I'm also interested in the way that intersects as an aspect of one's life and sort of what we experience out in the world in our various professions once it's known. So going back a little bit, how did you first experience your own sort of knowledge about that you were a lesbian, and how did that impact your life as you were thinking about your work in music?
Well, I kind of figured it out when I was 18, 19, something like that. But I was playing, and I'm just an orchestra musician. There were a lot of gay people around me. I instantly kind of got to be part of the club, and it was actually very nice. And then of course after graduate school doing the Women's Philharmonic, I mean, everybody kind of assumed a lot of things about that orchestra, even though a great number of the women, if not most of the women, were straight. But there was an assumption there, and so for 10 years of my life as I was there, people just, were convinced, and I didn't have to say anything. So it was just like, okay, she's a lesbian, yeah, so what? So it wasn't until I left that organization to be a music director for the first time, and I was a music director of an orchestra in Sacramento, and I realized that could have an impact, and I kind of, I not exactly retreated the closet, I mean, but there was a serious downplaying of that. And when I've gone to guest conduct, certainly in remote parts of the country where things like that are never discussed, I downplay it, and it was funny because I talked to a wonderful composer, lesbian composer, who is absolutely one of the top composers right now, Jennifer Higdon, and I was just so impressed that in the national publications that she was out there talking about this, and I said, you've really inspired me, and I just would really, I'm kind of tiptoeing out, and she goes, oh, Nan, if I were a conductor, I couldn't imagine doing that. It was like, thanks a lot. I'm out here hanging, just, so it's a tricky thing. And certainly it's very, very difficult as a woman. I'm finding it's also difficult because of the height thing. Somebody mentioned that's an issue.
So a short woman lesbian, you get 3 strikes?
Well, and I like contemporary music.
That must be the worst.
Yeah, sometimes that's, so I'm never sure what it is, but I've been a finalist many, many times, and a number of times I was told I didn't quite fit the profile of who they were looking for. So
one time in Laramie, as I recall.
Well, in thereabouts, yeah.
Yeah, we wonder what the profile was there. Well, I don't want to misjudge that community, but I imagine that it must be, sometimes it is difficult to know. I mean, in any artist, because you're going to lose jobs.
Right.
If you're an actor, you're going to lose jobs. You're going to lose more than you get.
And there are many different factors, and I don't know which one, because
I'm not saying it's not a factor,
right.
but I'm saying
sure
you
it's a
never
factor.
know. They always say you don't fit the profile.
Right.
You know.
But also, I know another job, I heard back from the orchestra that I work them too hard. That the guy that got the job just said, "You play great," and I want them to sound great. So I do push very nicely, but I insist on a level. If I'm conducting, that's the scary part, is that as a conductor, you're trying to shape this whole thing, but if they're not watching, you really are sunk. You have no control really of what comes out of their instruments. So it's a very odd profession.
Well, you were, I'm trying to remember the piece that you were preparing several months ago that was something to do with a foreign language.
Oh yeah, Beethoven 9.
Oh yeah, that's it, the Beethoven 9.
Yeah, that one, and also Fanny Mendelssohn Oratorio. There were two I was doing actually 1 week apart. So I had to get coached. Luckily my partner speaks German fluently and coached me a great deal to be able to pronounce these things and be able to work with the chorus, because you have to also be able to direct choruses when you combine the two with orchestra. But it was quite an undertaking, because Beethoven 9 just by itself is such a physical, it's almost an hour long just by itself. Actually, if you take some things really, really slow, you can make it an hour and 15 minutes. Right. Luckily for the orchestra, I like zippy tempos in this style, and but it was physically grueling to actually do it. I mean, it's and musically such a challenge. And you think, oh, Beethoven, everybody's done it, but it's hard. It's really hard. Well,
and the fact that everybody's done it doesn't mean that everybody's done it the way you're going to do it. I mean, I was interested when you said you're playing the flute, but you hear the bassoon and you think, now that's an interesting, it must be multiplied by, you know, every number of instruments as you prepare. I mean, do you hear this in your head as you, and I imagine, you know, make notes to yourself on the whatever, on the music?
Well, it's a multi-layered thing. The first thing I do, I'm marking scores. I'm looking for phrases, just like I know you sing. You go for what's the phrase, where am I going to breathe, all of that stuff, and you just want to make sense of the music, of where it goes, and you kind of work out chunks. And for modern music, if you have to do a 5/8 bar or something that's not just a regular old pattern, you'd want to make sure that you can see that. I mark entrances of instruments, and you have to be able to memorize a lot of that, and a lot of the work is you think of geometric patterns, like it's going from second clarinet to first flute, where they are in the orchestra. It's really horrible when you go to a new orchestra and they've switched positions. It kind of throws you for a loop a little bit. They can do that, but...
Now, the orchestras that you conduct are basically community orchestras. They kind of belong to the cities in which they're located. Is that the way with orchestras all across the country? I mean, when we think about, oh, there's an orchestra or a philharmonic or the symphony orchestra, is it always sponsored by a city, or is it privately funded? I mean, how do orchestras work? Well, I think more often than not they are attached to a geographic and specifically a town or community. The Women's Philharmonic, we actually originally named it Bay Area Women's Philharmonic, so it was a little bit broader. It wasn't San Francisco, but then they wanted, actually after I left, they did drop the Bay Area to be a more national kind of thing. There are American Composers Orchestra, and there's some specialty orchestras that... And do they tour then? Sometimes, and they do recordings and things like that, but they go after, they usually have a broader mission than just providing excellent music for the community. And to clarify that within the American Symphony Orchestra League, to say a community orchestra often means a very specific dollar amount, and usually equated with not very good. So I always say based in the community or community based, but absolutely connected to the community. And I think that's what's important, that our town has an orchestra. And it was with that spirit that
the Plymouth Symphony was created 57 years ago, and the West Hollywood Orchestra only 3 years ago. You know, and I think it really coincides with the city coming of age. How old is it now? 15 something years.
Something not much more than that.
And it's they also really wanted to. This was actually a city commission, I think, that came up with the original idea, and that then Mayor John Heilman, with the idea of bridging the many diverse communities within West Hollywood. Specifically, the most prominent being the gay and lesbian community and the Russian-speaking community. And we've done it. It's really, I mean, I have to have my little Russian dictionary sometimes, but several of the players in the orchestra will translate. But it's really a wonderful mix of people. And what's interesting, it brought together groups of people in West Hollywood, but it also drew in a lot of musicians who were very eager to see something new and different. And I had said early on that I didn't want this just to be like you know, every other orchestra in the LA area, only for West Hollywood, that somehow the image of West Hollywood is bigger and grander somehow. And the actual job description that I applied for said cultural diversity, inclusive kinds of programs, multilingual, educational concerts, commissioning of new works, and all of these things that just like, that's me! So, I see that it really is the job that I've been waiting for in a lot of ways. We just have to grow it a little bit more.
And are there professional musicians and sort of volunteer part-time musicians?
We have a combination, yes. And that's a challenge, but it is also very exciting. And the professionals that work with the orchestra are all very community spirited too, and they actually volunteer their time a lot too. But we've been very careful in bringing together groups of people that really want to play together, and like me. They have to like me, and that they have to enjoy doing different music. If they just want to do a Beethoven symphony all the time, or just this, we're not the orchestra. But if they want to come and have something very, very unique, and that's how we met, is doing something rather unique.
Right.
You as a narrator.
Kayla Gwynn's piece.
And I described this to a conducting class a couple weeks ago. The extra things that I had to do as a conductor in order to pull that piece off, including having me slumped down as a rag doll.
Yes, I remember you had to go to sleep for part of it.
Oh, it was
under
horrible,
the script.
yeah. And then I actually got to tell my former conducting teacher, yeah, and I cued him with my head on purpose, because that was a big no-no in conducting class, doing this.
Right, right.
But
well, it's interesting. A number of people that I've spoken to on this show, and in our community, talk about their sort of outsider lives, not just by virtue of what they do, but mostly by virtue of the fact that they grew up gay or lesbian, and dealing with it yourself, and then having other people deal with it, that it makes you feel like an outsider. And as a young person, that can be a real negative, but many people have said as they got older, it actually was quite freeing in a way. And I was thinking about that when you were talking about programming and the way the particular job description appealed to you, but also the way you put together programs. I mean, you're very innovative. And what you said earlier about, I want people to come in and hear things that they might be scared to come in and hear, I think you mean, gee, I never heard of that, or that's a new person. Talk about programming here and in Plymouth and other places you've done.
Well, I think maybe it is stemming from the fact that being an outsider, you want to kind of see more people like you represented on a concert. So it can't be all dead European white men. I mean, there's that. So I have, the Women's Philharmonic was very specific. I became an expert on women composers. I reconstructed scores, historical scores, and did a lot of real hands-on work, which is how I started doing the conducting thing. But when I left that orchestra and went to the one in Sacramento, my predecessor there had already been doing very multicultural kinds of programs, and there was an emphasis on minority composers. And again, an emphasis on contemporary American composers. So all along with the Women's Philharmonic, then with the Camellia Symphony, later with Orchestra Sonoma, and now with Plymouth Symphony, I've been acquiring ASCAP awards for programming of contemporary music, and those are handed out by the American Symphony Orchestra League at national conferences each year, and just got my 14th.
Wow.
Which I think is a good thing, because I was kind of stuck on 13 for 5 years. So it was nice to get a new one, and it was also nice because at that point with Plymouth, I didn't seek out to like just do lots and lots of contemporary music. I actually was building it through, but we did new pieces on our children's programs, and I had it, you know, integrated. But it's not for me anymore just okay to just do, let's represent women composers. I need to really showcase all of, you know, the composers' types in California. So it's very freeing and very fun. I'm hoping to do a work next season with West Hollywood with including taiko drums.
Huh.
And we're, you know, I just love those kinds of combinations of something new and different. And to me, it's more people who have maybe less classical music experience are more drawn in to those kinds of things, those what I consider crossover, than just a strict, you know, Mozart symphony. But if you bring them in with that and play Mozart, you know, what's not to like with Mozart?
Right, exactly. Well, the venue in West Hollywood, in my personal opinion, leaves a lot to be desired. I mean, you know, it's a good auditorium. You can hear the sound more or less, but would be wonderful to have some kind of performance space.
We would love that, and I think that's one of the difficult things with the orchestra right now, is trying to find a venue where we can actually fit and grow with the venue. It's venues, because we've been performing at West Hollywood Park Auditorium, Fiesta Hall, Fairfax High School, Beverly Hills High School, and the Pacific Design Center, and outside Santa Monica Boulevard. So we've tried, you know, many different venues, and anybody's ear that I can get in the planners for the future of West Hollywood, I'm always saying, Performing Arts Center, please, Performing Arts Center, we'd really love it. We would really love it. They all think it's a great idea. You know, it's just the balancing of the money at hand.
Nan, sort of looking around the country and maybe even around the world, we talked about the fact that there really are not that many women who are given the opportunity to conduct symphony orchestras or, you know, other kinds of big musical collections. Some of your colleagues, and you have talked on the radio kind of about this, say more about this. I mean, you're not a whiner, and you're not saying, oh, they didn't hire me because I'm a woman. But I think it'd be interesting to our viewers to know a little bit about this glass ceiling and how you perceive it.
Well, I think it's interesting that in the, I think it was in 1985, when the Women's Philharmonic was doing a search for a new conductor, when we did, you know, get Joanne Falletta, I really beat the bushes and came up with 40 names. And they were international. There were a number that applied from Europe and Israel, but that was it. That was all the women we knew about at all that were doing any kind of conducting. There are so many. Actually, there are a lot of women conductors right now, but they are in smaller orchestras and university positions, youth orchestras, and it's harder and harder to get up through the different ranks of orchestras. And what was really interesting is that Maren Alsop is she's probably at the height of all of us, and has just really done some extraordinary work. She's the music director of the Colorado Symphony, Cabrillo Music Festival here in California, and just this year was the first woman to conduct one of the major orchestras in England, the Bournemouth Symphony there. So she is well on her way, and she was doing this interview on NPR, as was I, and her thought, being where she is working a lot now, was that since they had a woman prime minister of Margaret Thatcher, that they were going to be more accepting of having women in those top positions. And she predicts that once we have a woman president, volunteers, that we would have more women conductors being given those top jobs.
Well, it is interesting because we don't have a lot of imagination, I don't think, about what people can do until we see them do it. I think it's no secret that I'm not a big fan of the Bush administration, but watching Colin Powell or Condoleezza Rice, whose politics I don't like particularly, but I have to confess that you can no longer fail to imagine an African American in those important positions. And I know it's the same, you know, with women. Until we had women on the Supreme Court, people couldn't even imagine that a woman could be a Supreme Court justice.
Right.
And once they were, you saw a lot more appointments around state Supreme Courts and, you know, other sort of places in the Justice Department. And finally, of course, we had a woman Attorney General for a while. So I definitely resonate, you know, to what you've said. But there must be a much smaller group of lesbians who are doing this work. And maybe because, given what you've said, there may be more than we know about because it's not a great area in which people are out.
I think actually the numbers are relative to how many women conductors. I would say, given who I know, we're at least a third of the women, if not half. So it's actually a larger, but you know, we can't talk about it as much.
No, I understand. And certainly I'm not saying, gee, tell me who they are. But I don't know, I have this theory, and it's probably a bad kind of prejudice because some of my best friends are straight women, but there seems to be sometimes a certain kind of energy that, that lesbians have that almost make them more acceptable in some circumstances. I'm kind of treading on a little bit thin ice here, maybe with, you know, with a million people out there, but it almost makes them more acceptable to some of the guys. Not that we are like guys, but I found this very interesting because I was the first woman ever to be the Speaker Pro Tem in our assembly, and your job mainly is running the floor during floor sessions. The next woman Speaker Pro Tem was one of the only other lesbians who was elected to the California legislature, Chris Kuehl. Now, I know other women could do it, but sometimes in watching Chris and just some tapes of myself, I feel like there is a slightly different energy there. And I don't know whether that allows you to be seen more easily in a position of authority that's generally given to males. I don't want to say it's been easy, but once you're hired, you know what I mean?
Right. I don't know. I've been giving it a lot of thought because we chatted earlier this week. But I almost wonder if it has to do with just accepting your truth and having to fight so hard for a lot of things that it kind of makes you spunky or something. It's possible. It's hard to say, you know. I don't know exactly how I come off. I mean, I have videotapes of my performances and such, because I'm more certainly not heavy-handed. As I said, I work orchestras hard, but it's not. I know a lot of other conductors that are more driven in terms of control and being kind of, you know, and I'm not that way.
But it is interesting, of all the women, that a full third would be lesbians in this profession. Of the ones
I would know, yeah.
Right, no, I understand, and I'm not saying, you know, let's count them up. But because I would think if there's a certain concern about being out, and yet women are driven,
still driven to do it.
to take these leadership positions.
Yeah.
You know, that it's,
well, I think there is something, maybe once you accept that part of yourself that, like, watch out, you know, I can do it. But it took me a long time. I mean, I was very, very, very shy. And at age 30 was when I actually enrolled in my very first beginning conducting class, absolute beginning. And I didn't want to be bad because I had seen too many bad conductors, and I didn't want any orchestras laughing at me. So I had to be really good before I, you know, really ventured out too far.
Has anyone ever threatened to out you in a way that made you either abandon a course of action? Or?
No, not specifically. No, I've actually had male stalkers. I had one. So, you know, as I said, I've been kind of in and out and around, but it's, I now, you know, duck the question. I had an interview the other day where they wanted to include my, are you married? You know, and that's a loaded question for me. Because
you've been with your partner a long time.
Yeah, over 15 years.
Right.
Yeah. So it's a very tricky thing, and yet I don't really want to have. There's part of it is that it's my life, you know, and I still remember being in the grocery store, and I don't know, grocery shopping, I'm schlepping around, and you know, oh, you want this, oh yeah, and someone came up and said, are you Nan Washburn? I'm sure you get this all the time, and it's just like, I'm in this mode of just buying my groceries. I don't want you looking at what I'm buying, you know, just go away. I'm off duty now. Sounds so horrible, but it's that.
Maybe if you didn't wear the tails everywhere.
That's right.
You probably wouldn't be recognized so much.
Actually, it doesn't happen that often, but.
Well, but
it's
still.
just, you know, especially having, and I still am a shy person, it's just hard to be out all the time in all ways.
Well, I hope, so, I mean, you just moved to West Hollywood yesterday.
Yesterday.
Yes.
Yesterday.
Not that you haven't been here, because conducting the orchestra, I mean, that was the other thing that was interesting to me, is to know how many people divide their time, because you can't earn a living.
Right.
Mostly. Being the conductor of one orchestra, or maybe even two. I mean, for you to be flying back and forth from Michigan to California in order to be the conductor of two orchestras, which you're still going to do. And Plymouth, I think, gave you a hard time about moving to California, because they absolutely wanted you to live there and be of the community.
Every orchestra wants you to be there really full time, and whether or not they can pay you for that is usually the concern. But Plymouth is okay. I mean, I've been there 3 years. I've gone to all the Rotary clubs. I've done so much in the community that all needs to happen. So they're realizing that I need to be able to do more of the conducting and maybe perhaps a little bit less of all the other kinds of things. Now in West Hollywood, I need to be here more. We need to really build the orchestra. There's so much excitement and so much potential for the organization, but it's hard work putting an orchestra together. And I think that the founders, the steering committee originally putting it together, hadn't any idea how difficult it was. And of course it takes a lot of money, and we have to work very hard. And with only 3 years under our belt, we're just starting to be able to apply for grant money. So we finally got our grant into the LA County Arts Commission and the California Arts Council, and we were awarded for both of those, and we're very happy about it. But just, you know, making it through the big grants, grant applications is a challenge when you have very tiny staff or none at all.
So what's the importance to a city or a town to have an orchestra?
Well, you can look at it different ways. There is just the kind of the heart and soul and feel of the community for its own organizations, arts organizations. But there are actually lots of information that I think they probably do this with the Bureau of Visitors and Conventions and such. Having an orchestra is actually economically very good for one's community, and they've done studies about that many companies and stuff will choose a city because they have an orchestra. That's one of the things. They may never go, but that seems to be a criteria. Certainly for a lot of parents, having an orchestra is a big deal. And we are just now, I've put together an education committee for the West Hollywood Orchestra, and we're just starting to get our education program into the schools, and we're really excited about that. Because I think we're going to really bring in a whole other group of people. I think a lot of parents wouldn't necessarily go to a concert for themselves, but they will come to accompany their child because they think it's really important for the child to hear music. And of course, I'm also after the parents to come in.
Right.
So, because I think that there's a whole couple generations in there that didn't have a lot of music growing up in terms of anything other than popular music on the radio. My parents' generation listened to the opera every Saturday afternoon and had music in the schools, and they had a basic understanding about classical music and an appreciation for it.
Well, we certainly lost that in our public schools.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, they talk about budget, they talk about basics, they talk about fundamentals, and believe me, I know what they talk about because I have been on the education committee and see what can get required and therefore funded and what won't, and the arts have just dropped off the edge of the
And it's so sad. I mean,
spectrum.
and aside from the fact that they're important by themselves and very important for our humanity, but they really are important disciplines for kids in school. I mean, they come out with the reports about listening to Mozart and learning an instrument and what it does to motor skills and all this stuff with your brain, but we keep talking till we're blue in the face, and it's sometimes an uphill battle. It's just like, but where's the bottom line, you know, and what are you, you know, self-produced, see, orchestras can't exist just by ticket sales. So they exist and spend money, and we have to raise money. So, but it's something that I just am adamant that can't go away. And all orchestras across the country are having a challenge recruiting new audience members. A number of orchestras, especially the large budget orchestras, were very content to do whatever kinds of programs made their patrons very happy, but now they're finding out that some of those same patrons are literally dying off. The audiences are getting older and older, and they can't seem to lure in younger audiences. So it's a big mission.
Well, of course, we get our music in so many different ways now that it's very much like theater, that you say, well, you know, I listen on the radio, or I download off the internet, only legal music, of course. And so I'm not sure I need to go to live performances anymore. And yet, theater is very much alive. It's certainly in Los Angeles and various of the larger cities, including smaller theaters. I mean, you can go to lots and lots and lots of different things, and you'll see, you know, people are there. And I think people think of going to the theater, but don't necessarily think of going to an orchestral performance, because we don't get as much of that, I think, on, you know, television or whatever, whereas we would think about drama.
Well, also, I think that people have had more experience with drama, and they know how exciting a live play is, as opposed to just, I mean, we all love movies and we love TV, but it's something very special that happens, that energy. And I think that a live music performance is just, it's electrifying. It's just wonderful. And of course, I get the best seat in the house, which is no seat at all, but it is such fabulous energy. I think that a lot of American orchestras especially have, in their quest for, and not all orchestras have done this, but a lot of them got a little bit snooty. And they got a little bit full of themselves and thought, you know, you should only behave in a certain way when you come to our concerts. You should only wear certain things. You should only make this much, you have to make this much money in order to do that. There was definitely that sense that you had to already be there in order to be part of this gang. And a lot of musicians, I mean, some of my dearest friends, have gotten a little bored with the actual putting on a concert. And I still don't understand that. But I've seen, I have two impressions when I go to a concert. I love it. I'm totally bored and want out within 5 minutes. I mean, I have no tolerance for that kind of just mailing it in, or, you know, punching in the time clock. And I think that still is a little bit of the image of classical orchestras, that you go and it's boring. And I have really tried all the way through my career. I don't understand how you can just do that, because it's just like such great stuff, and you just have to be impassioned about it, or, you know, why don't you go be a banker or something?
Well, it was interesting. I was up in Northern California along the coast in Mendocino last week, and the Mendocino Music Festival was going on. And they had a huge tent with, I don't even know why the acoustics were as fabulous as they were, but they had some acoustic boards, you know, over the orchestra and out along the edges of the tent, and all these wooden chairs set up. And during the day, they were having rehearsals for the performance that night or the night after of Verdi's Requiem. And you didn't pay anything to go in and sit and watch the rehearsals, and so my sister and I went and sat down. She's the president of the Sacramento Youth Symphony, and so has had an interest in this as well. And we were just fascinated by the rehearsal. I don't think they got more than, I couldn't even tell you how many bars, you know, but I mean, I never saw them turn a page, let me just put it that way, in terms of the rehearsal. But there's this huge chorus and the orchestra, and, you know, they were, and it was fascinating. And I was thinking about this show because the conductor was telling them something, and you would go, oh, well, how would they hear the difference, or how does he know to say that? You know, it was fascinating, and I think people would do well to be able to just know about and access something more easily. You know, as we're wandering around in, I don't know, in the malls or wherever we go on the weekends, if there was a way to experience that, I don't know, it seems to me you have to make so much of an effort to go to a concert in a way.
Right. Well, actually, you bring up shopping malls. I've done many concerts in shopping malls.
Oh, talk about
Yes. Oh, I love in Sacramento, actually. We did a traditional Mother's Day concert every year, and the orchestra really didn't love it because acoustically it's like all over the place.
Yeah.
And it's logistically a little bit tricky. The idea was that actually the shopping mall paid the orchestra to be there to bring in more shoppers. It wasn't like the shopping stopped. So it was, but it was really fun. It was very kind of a mix of pops and light classics. Very, very well attended. Was kind of a curious experience for me because we had the orchestra not in the traditional black, again, just kind of being spring colors, or I can't remember what we had. But anyway, pretty much they looked a little bit nicer than maybe the shoppers, but they pretty much blended in. And for kind of getting on the inside track of what's going on, the audience would circle the orchestra. So they would be behind the orchestra watching me and turning all red and getting all hot and stuff, but then I could tell they got a little funny when I would point, you know, in the direction to the player. And in one instance, actually, in terms of orchestras, violins are over here, and you've got cellos, and then you have basses over here. And I seen, you know, when you start the concert, you like look to see where everybody is. And I went and I did some big cue over to the basses, and they had moved because there, you know, the audience, and there was a bunch of audience, and they kind of went, you know, and it's like, what are we supposed to do? Are we supposed to sing now? What? So it had its challenges, but it was great.
Accessible.
People were walking by, going to J.C. Penney's or wherever, and oh my God, there's an orchestra. So I agree. If it were up to me, I would be playing in the streets, doing whatever it would take to demystify or make it more accessible. So
I know it's sort of strange because you think we must be about halfway through now, but it's almost actually been the whole hour. Only a few minutes remaining.
Chatty Nan.
So no. You know, I've loved it, and I think it's very impressive what you've done, and
thank you.
I think our community and our larger community should be very proud of the work that you're doing. So what is next? I know not geographically because you're here, and these two orchestras are definitely what you will attend to, but maybe in terms of programming, what is your dream in terms of what you will do, and you know, how you think that'll impact the communities that your orchestras are in?
Well, I think doing a lot more of the same kinds of things, but just things that I can't do because it requires too much money. You know, I'm always looking for something else, a new commissioned work. We've actually commissioned a couple pieces with West Hollywood Orchestra, but I'd love to do more. Actually, I'm speaking with a Russian immigrant composer who lives in New York, who's very interested in writing music for West Hollywood, and we're talking about, you know, the possibility of this, and we're applying for grants, and Plymouth is also very interested in having that. See, that's the advantage when you have the same music director, that you can do both. So it would be doing more of those kinds of things, plus things like I'd really love to commission a jazz guitar concerto. There isn't one. I'd love to have, you know, just those kind of unique things. West Hollywood, we're really looking to very soon do a recording of children's music, which I think is, again, we need to get more music out to kids.
Now, are there gay or lesbian composers that themselves don't get aired much? I don't suppose in reading a music piece you'd go, oh, that must have been written by someone gay. But still, would you give them a little more of a showcase?
I definitely do, but in the case of a lot of gay male composers, that's a lot of our favorite composers. It's really a lot, yeah. So it's very easy to, you know, put together, you know, Aaron Copland and Bernstein and Schubert and, you know, Britten, and, you know, there's lots and lots. So they're very much more visible than a lot of composers. But we certainly love to do lots of featuring of gay composers, but I think, you know, more specifically, lesbian composers are less visible. And I've had some instances where I do program them on the performance, but it's not, they'd prefer me not really talking about the specifics. But
still, you know, if their music gets heard, it gets played, it gets well interpreted.
Absolutely.
It helps no matter what. We don't only say, gee, let's play lesbian music now, because we, you know, we wouldn't know.
Well, and a lot of them will downplay it because they also don't want to have another label. You know, it's already hard, again, as women composers to get heard. And people are afraid that, you know, if they listen to a work by a lesbian composer, that, oh, it will be so strange and so, you know, like they can't relate. It's just like, it's music, you know, get over yourself. You know, it's just what that is. I have no idea, but anyway.
Well,
I like them all.
Of course you do, Nan. And thank you so much for being on the show, and probably more importantly for being here with us now and with our orchestra in West Hollywood. And congratulations to Michigan for retaining you, and all the other cities that should have hired you. Too bad for them.
Yeah, right.
And to you, thank you for joining us. And remember, there needs to be some music in your life, and if there's an orchestra in your community, an orchestra in your city, in your town, you should support them. And not only that, remember to make your own music and get used to it.